On the Wake Up Radio presents The Center with your host, DC Radical One.
Greetings, Black family, and welcome to On the Wake Up Radio. I am your host, DC Radical One, and you have entered the center. Shout out to our wonderful producer, Cindy Ashby. You can check us out on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and iHeartRadio at On the Wake Up Radio. So let's see who we have in the building while I set things up. BB4 Day Straight Black Pride, the Spirit, Mind, Character, Soul. BB4 Day Straight Black Pride to Brother You Got Ripped Off. BB4 Day Straight Black Pride to Sister Farnessa. BB4 Day Straight Black Pride to Brother Elijah. And greetings to Lord Bell. Haven't seen you in a while, Lord Bell. Hope you're doing well. Tonight's discussion is going to be one that I thought I had before, but I hadn't. At least I thought I had half of it before. We're going to be talking about the situation, Black Power to Nubia Ptah. We're going to be talking about the situation on the continent in the heart of Africa, with Sudan and the Congo. And so, because I know to some degree I've talked about the Congo before, at least as far as the ramifications of Lumumba's betrayal and murder, I'm going to start with the Sudan. And, we're going to go there for half an hour, I think. I mean, no, an hour. My bad. Not half an hour. And then, I look for something that I can't find. And then, we do about an hour of, there we go. About an hour of, on the Congo. And I think we got about 4 videos within this. So, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I don't think somehow I missed talking about this story, especially the Sudan aspect of it. And I'm not quite sure how that happened because it's really kicked off nearly a year ago now. And when I looked, I didn't see any shows covering the subject matter at all. And so I came to the realization that I need to talk about it as I try to figure out what music is appropriate for the night. All right. So we're going to be experimenting musically. Let's see. So y'all give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on this musical selection as we get started. That's really not the one I wanted. Can't seem to find the one I wanted, so maybe it's not loaded up. But so be it. So with that being said, so Lord Bill, you say you just love it, and that's good. Let's get into the first aspect of it. So what's going on basically is, and y'all let me know if the music's too loud because it sounds loud on my end. Basically what's going on is you have, in essence, a civil war in what I now refer to as Northern Sudan, because what is now the Sudan and then South Sudan were all one country at one time. And then South Sudan got their independence about, I think it's been about maybe 12, 13 years ago now. It hasn't been that long. And so what's left of Sudan, Northern Sudan, now they're having a conflict between two people after they ousted Omar al-Bashir, who was the ruler for, I don't know how long, maybe 25, 30 years or so. I think we have a video which gets into all of that. And so you have that conflict there. And here's what you need to know about the Sudan. The Sudan is where the Nubian kingdoms used to be. It has been, of course, the Muslims have come and taken over, and the Muslim personality of conquest and wanting to breed out blackness has taken over for years now the Sudanese Muslims, which was the root of the problem and why the South Sudanese, who are mostly Christian and some practice some of the more ancient local religions that precede Christianity, they in essence seceded to get away from that type of barbarity, right? And for those who've seen it, the Sudanese people, jet black people, beautiful, shiny jet black skin, a lot of them very tall, angular, statuesque, regal type people, right? And to be completely honest, this is gonna sound crazy when I say it, but a lot of the Northern Sudanese, some of them look like mixed like black and Arab, but because a lot of the mixing is done with the blackest people on earth, a lot of them really look like black people in America. You see what I'm saying? So you can see the differences between these two sets of people as they separated themselves out. That's what made the jet black people easier to attack. Now, the thing about it is, this conflict, the jet black people ain't got nothing to do with it. They out the way. This conflict is between two different groups of Arabized Sudanese people. once they overthrew the former ruler, it came time to figure out who's going to rule, and then that's where the fight began. And so that's where we are with that. So I'm gonna get into this short article. I thought I brought it up from Britannica, but apparently not. Brought it up from this is from Wikipedia. All right, whatever. So we'll take it with a grain of salt, but I know a modicum of Islamic history, so I'll be able to tell you, hopefully, if something is just totally wrong. You know what I'm saying? So let's get into this article. It says the Islamization of the Sudan region, also known as the Sahel, encompasses a prolonged period of religious conversion through military conquest and trade relations spanning the 8th to 16th centuries. Following the 7th century Muslim conquest of Egypt and the 8th century Muslim conquest of North Africa, Arab Muslims began leading trade expeditions into sub-Saharan Africa, first towards Nubia, and later across the Sahara into West Africa. Much of this contact was motivated by interest in trans-Saharan trade, particularly the slave trade, right? Now, those of you who have watched my Africa versus Everybody lectures, we have gone, not in depth, but we have definitely talked about that Arab slave trade, which is still going on. And I'm currently reading Islam's Black Slaves, which is a pretty good book. I'm going to do a book review of it when I'm finished. It was written by a hat, but the interesting part about it is that the hat, well, I don't know if this was intentional or unintentional, or he just slipped up or whatever. He basically points the finger at the hats for being involved in the Arab slave trade. So, you know, that's a little known fact that was confirmed by a hat. Let's get back to the article. It says the proliferation of Islamic influence was largely a gradual process. The Christian kingdoms of Nubia were the first to experience Arab incursion, starting in the 7th century. They held out through the Middle Ages until the kingdom of Mercuria and Old Nangola both collapsed in the early 14th century. Sufi orders played a significant role in the spread of Islam from the 9th to the 14th century, and they proselytized across trade routes between North Africa and the sub-Saharan kingdom of Mali. They were also responsible for the setting up of zawiyas on the shores of the river Niger. Now, Sufism is like a more mystical aspect of Islam that isn't really recognized by Orthodox Muslims, and a lot of Sufism in Africa really kind of incorporates local religions and into Islam and kind of melds them together, and that's how you get Sufism. So that's why it isn't really recognized by Orthodox Islam. And then one of the things that this article doesn't really state is that the reason that process of Islamization over the Nubian kingdoms was because they fought back, right? To get a better understanding of those wars between the Nubian Christian kingdoms like Mercuria and the Arabs, I refer you, of course, to our book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, where Dr. Chancellor Williams covers that extensively. Peace and Black African Power to Brother Crow. So that this just gives us a background as to how Islam has shaped and molded this region. And let me digress for a moment, because I forgot to mention, we will be back on tomorrow, and we will be talking about Nature Boy the man known as Nature Boy, what's his name, Eligio Bishop, whatever his name is. He was recently convicted of various crimes, and we're going to talk about him, and we're going to talk about a phenomenon that happens in the Black community a lot, dealing with us propping up perverts and pedos and them reaching very high levels of success and prestige in the Black community. So that's going to be tomorrow at 8 o'clock. So for those that didn't get the notification, I'm giving you the notification now. So now, I just wanted to give that background into how this area of Africa became Muslim. Now, this article here, and let me see who it's from. I'm not actually sure who it's from. But anyway, this gives us a basic, simple outline of the Sudanese civil war and what they say are the 6 root causes. This is from January 22nd of this year. It says Sudan, a nation of rich cultural diversity and historical significance, has been deeply scarred by a tumultuous history marked by internal conflicts. The term Sudan Civil War encompasses a series of protracted struggles that have shaped the nation's trajectory over several decades. This comprehensive exploration aims to delve into the roots, phases, and ongoing implications of the Sudan Civil War, seeking to provide a nuanced understanding of this complex and enduring conflict. All right, now, it says, first, what is happening in South Sudan? To comprehend the intricacies of the Sudan crisis, it is important to navigate through its colonial past. From 1899 to 1956, Sudan was jointly administered by the British and the Egyptians. The post-independence era witnessed a struggle for power and resources, with the divide between the Arab Muslim North and the non-Arab, predominantly Christian, or what they call animist, just means African religion, South, emerging as a significant fault line. The nascent nation's early governments grappled with the challenge of harmonizing the diverse interests of its populace, leading to a series of conflicts and discontent. The seeds of the civil war in Sudan were planted during these formative years, culminating in a series of struggles over ethnic, religious, and economic disparities. Now, let me stop right there. One thing we find when we look at the history of Africa, before they straight Black Pride, Brother Dessalines, and greetings to Brother Jimmy. One thing we find when we study the history of Africa is that in fact, most nations that have internal conflict, you can really look to the colonial drawing of boundaries as part of the reason why there's conflict, because they don't care or didn't care and still don't care about this group's ancestral rights to land, this group's natural territory, this group's belief system, and so forth and so on. And so you start pushing people together who, whether they may not have had a natural conflict, they also didn't have the kinship that they may have with another group. So you'll divide, literally just put a line and divide family and nations from each other and push them next to people who they don't get along with. You see what I'm saying? And this allows conflict to brew, right? So this, what they just said with Sudan is a perfect example for us to see. So when we look, we like, man, why Africa can't get itself together? Why these people can't get along? Blah, blah, blah. This is a beautiful explanation of that phenomenon, right? Now, let's see. Let me get back to it. Says the first Sudanese War, 1955 to 1972. The first significant eruption of violence occurred in 1955, even before Sudan gained full independence. The southern regions, feeling marginalized, rebelled against the central government in Khartoum. This marked the onset of the first Sudanese Civil War, a conflict that persisted until 1972. The Addis Ababa Agreement, which Addis Ababa is in Ethiopia, brokered during this period and granted autonomy to the South, temporarily quelling hostilities. Now, I don't know what broke that agreement, but one thing I do know is that the discovery of oil later would change the whole dynamics of this situation. So that's another thing that happens. When one group discovers resources, then the other group that may have pushed them off or tried to separate from, or whatever the case may be, all of a sudden like, hey, oh, wait a minute. We didn't know y'all had that. Maybe we can come together and you see what I'm saying? And then you have another conflict because they're like, wait, nah, you was disrespecting us. Now that we got oil or gold or diamonds or whatever it is, now you want to be our friend. And one thing that I didn't know about this region is that the gold mines that were there from the time of ancient Kemet were still running and prosperous in the time of Islam. And so a great source of wealth in the Islamic, the early Islamic caliphates came from African gold mines. I had always thought that when they went to the north into Persia and into the Byzantine Empire, that they got a vast amount of the early Islamic empires got a vast amount of their wealth from those regions. Well, they did, but of course, just like now today, no matter where you go to get resources, Africa is going to have more resources than any other place you go. And that was true 1,500 years ago. It was true 2,500 years ago. It was true 3,500 years ago. You see what I'm saying? 5,000, 10,000 years ago. Today, 500 years from now and 1,500 years from now, it'll be true. And so that's something we have to remember when we're studying or trying to figure out what's going on in Africa. Behind a lot of things is going to be two things. One, two people are together, packed together that don't belong together. Two, somebody's trying to steal some resources that don't belong to them. And then three, the part that nobody wants to talk about, somebody's trying to steal some African women that don't belong to them too. But nobody wants to talk about that part. But if you look at the history of Africa, one of the resources that they always trying to steal is black women. So when you see all this stuff trying to convince black men not to be with black women, it's a trick. You know what I'm saying? We had to remember what John Henry Clark said. He said, they laughed at your clothes and they made you change your clothes. They laughed at your hair and made you change your hair. Well, another thing they laughing at your women and making you give away your women. So remember that, brother and sister. And I'm paraphrasing Dr. John Henry Clark, but that principle that he laid down applies to that situation as well. So let's get back to the article. It says, renewed tensions and the Second Civil War. The fragile peace established by the Addis Ababa Agreement disintegrated in 1983 when the Sudanese government under President Ghaffar Namiri annulled the autonomy of the South and imposed Islamic Sharia law nationwide. This seismic shift reignited hostilities, giving rise to the Second Sudanese Civil War, a devastating conflict that spanned 2 decades. Okay, see, all right, there it is. That explains everything. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with Islam, Sharia law is basically a strict interpretation of Islamic law being implemented, and he's trying to implement it as a Muslim on a populace that's not Muslim, right? So of course you're going to have conflict there. So when you think of Sharia law, just think of the outward appearance of Saudi Arabia. Not, well, how can I put it? Saudi Arabia as the people have to live, not how the royals live, because they got their own law, right? But how the people in Saudi Arabia have to live. That's your basic understanding of Sharia law without getting into a whole exegesis about Islam, right? Now, the thing about Black people in general in our natural state is our natural understanding of the universe and understanding of morality and right and wrong is higher than any religious understanding. You see what I'm saying? So you don't have to write a book to tell Black people in their natural state not to rob anybody or steal from anybody or take anybody's wife or any of that stuff, because we come from a place that has vast resources, a massive landmass, natural greenery, water. I mean, like, you know, say everything you need, and it's our it's part of our nature to just take what you need. Now, to outsiders, it look like we're celebrating access, but if you live on top of a gold mine, of course you're gonna rock gold. You live on top of a gold mine. The gold is sitting there. You see what I'm saying? Why not utilize it? You know what I'm saying? But to outsiders who don't have it, it looks excessive. So I say that to say that an outsider attempting to impose their law on us is going to automatically be a conflict, because a lot of times they really want you to exercise a lower level of understanding. You see what I'm saying? Because outsiders don't have the capacity to process the understanding of the universe that African people naturally have. That's why we spent, if you really understand what's going on, that's why we spent so much time over and over and over teaching Europeans, trying to get them to do stuff like bathe every day. You see what I'm saying? Not live with a bunch of animals. You see what I'm saying? Like, think about it. To this day, on the internet, you have Europeans and even European doctors debating whether or not you need to bathe every day, or whether or not you need to wash your legs, or all this stuff like that. The Moors was having this argument in their time. The ancient Kemet was having this argument with the Greeks in their time. Like, this ain't nothing new. But I'm just showing on a basic level that there's just a different worldview between being African and being European, being African, being Arab, and so forth and so on, right? But I digress. Let me get back to the article at hand. The Sudanese People's Liberation Movement, led by John Garang, emerged as a key player in the conflict, advocating for Southern independence. As Dr. Khaled would say, separation and independence. The war witnessed egregious human rights violations, including mass displacement, famine, and atrocities committed by both sides. Regional dynamics also played a role, with neighboring countries becoming entangled in various ways. Now, my understanding is the most of the atrocities, I'm just being honest, were committed by the Arab-influenced North, including the Janjaweed, who caused a great massacre in Darfur. I believe that was in the 90s. And I'll give credit what credit is due. Y'all know I have my issues with this person, but the person that informed me of this back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, was Minister Farrakhan. He traveled over there. He talked to the people, tried to do some mediation or whatever. Obviously that didn't work. But he did come back and give a report and let us know what was going on. because you have to understand this was pre-internet. So if the major media didn't cover it, if you weren't like someone like Dr. Welsing who used to read like 10 newspapers a day, yeah, you just didn't know what was going on because the media wouldn't cover a lot of stuff that was going on in Africa, at least over here. Now, says, what are the causes? So it's some of the causes of the Second Sudanese Civil War. Second Sudanese Civil War, which spans from 1983 to 2005, had multiple complex causes rooted in historical, political, economic, and social factors. Some of the key causes include religious and ethnic differences, which we talked about earlier. The conflict was fueled by long-standing religious and ethnic differences between the Arab Muslim-dominated government in Khartoum and the predominantly Christian and African populations in the southern regions of Sudan, right? Number two, resource allocation and marginalization. Again, the money, you know what I'm saying? In the grand scheme of things, the southern regions, rich in natural resources, felt marginalized and economically disadvantaged. Disparities in resource allocation and development projects exacerbated tensions between the central government and southern populations. Like most places in Africa, we're sitting literally on top of the money, you know what I'm saying? Gold, diamonds, oil, name it, and yet somebody else is running away with the bag. That's always going to cause conflict. Number three, Islamic Sharia law. Talked about that. The imposition of Islamic Sharia law by the Sudanese government in 1983 heightened discontent in the predominantly non-Muslim southern regions. We covered that. Number four, political marginalization. Southern Sudanese felt politically marginalized and underrepresented in the national government. The lack of political inclusivity and representation fueled a desire for autonomy. Yeah, because they saw the black people as other. And number five, when you can't get along and you can't get no respect, you got to pull out the hammers and the gatlings. You know what I'm saying? Armed rebellion. You know what I'm saying? The Sudanese People's Liberation Army movement, led by John Garang, emerged as a key rebel force fighting for the autonomy of the southern regions. The conflict escalated into a full-scale Second Civil War marked by extensive violence and displacement. Like, black people normally fight wars of defense. When we start reaching for them hammers, that means that we can't take it no more. So that's pretty much what happened. The brothers in the South kept getting disrespected. They had the land, the resources. The people in the North was like, yeah, you ain't gonna do nothing. And they said, okay, we're gonna do something. And then it went down from there. So that's a basic outline of the previous Civil War. Now, next article, I try to move through this relatively quickly, especially for me, because we're not going past 2 hours, regardless of what happens. All right. So whether you got ripped off, you hold me to that. And real quick before I get to this next article, speaking of brother, you got ripped off, because I normally wait for the first hour to get to this, but I just want to say I now have a way to distribute video files. So, and we'll talk about how we want it done. I'll stop at the hour mark, but I have distributed a couple of lectures to Brother You Got Ripped Off and Sister Spirit Mind Character. So they're going to be my quality control on these lectures. So everyone who's been asking me for them, we now have a way to do that, do the digital download, and then I will get into like pricing and how those things will be distributed. So now with that, and I will get back to this article. All right. It says the war in Sudan is a consequence of a derailed transition. This is from Al Jazeera. This is from the 29th of October of last year. Says Sudan's transition should have focused on stabilizing the economy and convening elections, not dismantling the ancient, I think that's supposed to be ancient regime. Says anyway, 200 days into the war in Sudan, the Sudanese people remain trapped in a conflict not of their own making. More than 9,000 civilians have been killed and 5.6 million forced to flee their homes, while the capital, Khartoum, continues to be ravaged by savage internecine warfare. Meanwhile, the world's attention is gradually shifting elsewhere. Well, has totally shifted elsewhere. When the war erupted on April 15th, the story circulating by international media outlets was that this is a typical power struggle between two generals who were once allies. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the commander-in-chief of the Sudanese Armed Forces, and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, the commander of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Nothing is further from the truth. All right, well, let's see what the truth is. Recently, in a statement marking the 6 months of the war, the United Nations Undersecretary General Martin Griffiths said this is one of the worst humanitarian nightmares in recent history. Now, understand, you had the Rwandan genocide in recent history. Now, maybe he doesn't consider that recent history. So for something to be worse than that, and you also had the genocide in Darfur. So I don't know if he's being hyperbolic or his time frame is shrunk or this thing is worse than I thought. But that's a hell of a statement. Y'all know I don't really trust United Nations people, but that's another story. He emphasized the horrific report of sexual violence, including wanton open violation. Now, what it doesn't say here is, because this is what normally happens when they talk about sexual violation. We just in our mind think of women. What isn't said in a lot of these places is that a lot of this violation is also of children, and depending on what group of people you're dealing with, there's also violation of men that occurs, but that isn't usually covered. So when he talk about how horrific it is, more than likely what I just said is also taking place. Yet he said nothing as to why the war is being fought. If the media has mischaracterized the reason behind the eruption of the war, high-level statements from the international community, like the one above, have been completely silent about it. Right. Neither have tried to envision. My bad. Hold on. Yeah, it says, neither have tried to envision Sudan's path forward. On April 11th, 2019, an uprising triggered by the deteriorating economic situation toppled President Omar al-Bashir, ending his 3-decade-long rule. Sudan formerly experienced 2 uprisings that brought down military regimes in 1964 and 1985. Given their experiences with past uprisings, in 2019, the Sudanese people widely expected a brief political transition that would address economic issues with the help of the international community and prepare the country for multi-party elections within a year or 2. However, that was not to be. This time around, 2 factors that were non-existent in 1964 and 1985 came into play and proved to be paramount. First, because of the Islamist comportment of al-Bashir's regime, regional and international players were more focused on dismantling it, so elections would not end up bringing Islamists back to power. For this purpose, the international community had to start a project to remake the country. Dissolving the former ruling NCP and hunting its leaders outside of the purview of the law became the main objective of the transition. A commission that was not accountable to the Attorney General but subject to judicial review, was formed for this purpose. The comprehensive overhaul of the country included calls for Sudan to join the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, to rush into convening. Wait, what? Oh, hold up. Hold up. I'm going to read this slowly. The comprehensive overhaul of the country included calls for Sudan to join the Convention on Eliminating All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, right? Comma. To rush into convening pride parades even before homosexuality is decriminalized, and to normalize relations with Israel by joining the Abraham Accords. Now hold up. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What in the world? Straight black pride to brother Jarake. Brother, please let me know how you pronounce your name. But let's go back. Because y'all know what I do. I scan the articles. I do not read the articles. But I cannot believe I have heard nothing about this. I should have read the article. But y'all get my reactions in real time. So when the people wanted Bashir out the way, right? I've heard from people that let's just be honest, he sucked as a ruler, right? That's what I heard from people from that region, right? They wanted him removed because of the economy and because he's been ruling a long time. And we've heard this story before in other African countries. But instead of them setting up some elections and allowing the people to try to pick somebody and have some type of functional government, or at least have some type of smooth transition to a functional government, right? Or anything, they're running around talking about pushing feminism, homosexuality, and loving Jews. What do that have to do with you having a functional government and having some food to eat and some electricity and be able to use the internet? All right, bro, thank you. If I had not read this for myself, I would not believe it. And yet, I should not be shocked. But it's so ridiculous. And I thank the ancestors for leading me to this article, because I was just looking for stuff all day. And I looked at it and I was like, all right, this looks like this might explain some things. We might get some understanding. Oh boy, did we get some understanding here tonight. It says, second, uninitiated neoliberals, mostly former communists. Former who? Communists. What's another word for communists? Zionists and Baptists were anointed by the international community as the legitimate heirs of al-Bashir. As soon as they became comfortable in their new positions, they completely forgot about the economic woes of the country and failed to produce any program for reform. Now let's stop right there. First of all, the people didn't ask for any reform. The people asked for a revolution. What is a revolution? Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad told us: complete, constructive change, not reform. Complete, constructive change, right? This change was neither complete and it certainly was not constructive. So again, we have people on the ground who have had a shockingly, virtually peaceful revolution. And then, as he said, neoliberals and communists and homosexuals and Israel come in here and totally derail everything that they were trying to do. And now we have a disaster on our plate, and we're sitting around looking, saying, man, why can't these black people get along with these other black people? They're in the same country. And instead, we need to be trying to say, hey, man, where's the small hat in all this, bro? Because I swear, when you find a problem, if you flip over a table and look in the corner, it's going to be a little hat over there running to hide from the light. But I digress. Soon enough, they locked horns for power, each wanting to have a larger piece of the cake in this exceptionally long transition. As a matter of fact, the entire transition was transformed into an exercise in fielding the neoliberals as newfound political elite of the country. So basically, what he's telling me, because neoliberal just means servants of Zionists. That's all it means. These fancy terms, man, to get us all confused. That's all it means. I had no idea that there was any connection. I'm just doing this to get the information out to the people and to study myself so I can have a better understanding. Man, please. Y'all don't even know how heated I am. I don't even need my coffee no more after this. It says when the Constitutional Charter of August 2019, which sealed a marriage of convenience between the military component, both the SAF and the RSF, on one hand and the neoliberals on the other, frayed in October 2021, the international community pushed another deal down the throat of the two sides. That was the framework agreement of December 2022. Eventually, Hamedi, already beleaguered and fearing international sanctions for launching a bloody crackdown on a sit-in in Khartoum in June 2019, threw in his lot with the neoliberals in a bid to improve his political fortunes. Allegedly, he was also on a mission to restore democracy and civilian rule. By then, it was clear to diplomats in Khartoum that an eventual showdown between the SAF and RSF was inevitable. Yet nobody was willing to call for ending the faltering transition and convening elections. Sudan sits at the intersection of the quote-unquote Middle East, which is just the part of Africa that was cut off by the Suez Canal, North Africa, which is the part that was invaded by the Arabs, East Africa, and the Sahel. As such, it's very much in the throes of all the ills in these regions. In this accursed quarter, if you profess a position tolerating the possible return of Islamists to power, you're grabbing the third rail with both hands. This is mainly because groups and countries in the region are very quick to attack anyone who questions whatever they're doing to exclude Islamists. I mean, and I understand that. But if you're going to replace the Islamists with the neoliberals, man, you just jumped out the frying pan into the fire. For them, any Islamist is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and a likely operative of Islamic State, Al-Shabaab, or Boko Haram. In Sudan in particular, such conversation takes place in the shadow of 3 decades of government that the West abhorred and always accused of doing something nefarious. This has been the case even though the government went to great lengths to gain Western acceptance, including by agreeing to the secession of South Sudan, adopting the 2005 Constitution, and opening unprecedented avenues for women in education, employment, and leadership. Man, these people are trying to make a deal with the devil and fighting to see which enemy they're going to align with. And they causing all types of confusion and destroying their country. So I'm going to stop right there. Because I do have a video that deals with the outsiders who have positions, and then I will come back and we'll talk about this issue.
The battle in Sudan rages on. Mediation efforts and ceasefires have so far failed. Can regional powers that back the rival sides bring enough pressure to stop the fighting, or is their involvement only complicating peace efforts? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Foliba Thibault. Fighting in Sudan between forces loyal to two generals is threatening to turn into a prolonged conflict. Violence erupted in Khartoum a week ago. That followed weeks of power struggles between Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his deputy Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti, the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. So far, hundreds of people have been killed and thousands injured. It's led to thousands more fleeing the capital, Khartoum, for neighboring Chad. Many of them fear this may be the beginning of a much wider conflict. Now, outside forces are complicating the situation, with both sides receiving support from regional and global powers. We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, this report.
From chaos to calm, intense street battles have thrown Sudan's capital into turmoil in the past few days. Its streets are emptying as thousands of people flee Khartoum. The conflict is driven by a power struggle between Sudan's army, led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group, under Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. The two generals have been jostling for control of the country's economy and its military. That has torn up plans for a return to civilian rule.
This destruction and sound of gunfire did not leave room for happiness that our beloved people deserve. We are very sad for this pain, but there's still hope that together we'll pass this crisis and come out of it more united and strong. One army, one nation.
Sudan's strategic location on the Red Sea and its access to the Nile River and vast gold reserves have long been coveted by other powers, leading to both sides being backed by outside forces. Hemeti accuses Egypt of colluding with Burhan and sending fighter jets and soldiers to help the Sudanese military. Egypt has denied the allegations and said its forces were in Sudan for a joint military exercise. Hemeti has close ties with Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Libya. And Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar has reportedly sent military supplies to the Rapid Support Forces, which he denies. The Russian mercenary organization Wagner Group has also been accused of plundering Sudan's gold resources to bankroll its operations in Ukraine.
We don't have yet information that it has been actively engaged in conflict, but it is, of course, in no way it can be denied that it has been somehow behind the Hemeti's organization and trying to protect that RSF's dominations in Sudan's politics.
Israel is involved too. Its foreign minister, Eli Cohen, has been engaging with Burhan on normalizing ties between the two countries in recent years. A prolonged conflict would also disrupt plans by UAE companies to build ports, as well as China's investments in Sudan. Any escalation would have regional implications, threatening nearby states like South Sudan that export oil through its northern neighbor. There would also be a risk of rising numbers of refugees fleeing across borders, causing more instability. And for Sudan itself, the longer the conflict goes on, the bigger the risk of it widening and the greater the suffering of its people. Felix Nyawara for Inside Story.
Now, I think we see that, and if we break it down in a very simplistic way, we pretty much have a region that is looks like it's going to be divided if they're not careful, between Islam and Zionism slash quote unquote communism, if you will, which, it's the same thing. And they probably don't even understand what's taking place. And I'm sure the people don't understand. And our lack of understanding globally of Zionism, its true intentions and what it truly means. And this is not just for Black people. This is for everybody on earth. There's a great misunderstanding about what Zionism is. It's going to cause them, you can make the argument they've already fallen into a trap, which will lead to their destruction. So I just wanted to show that, because that shows how people are lining up and who's helping who and who's on whose side. And so, as Africa often finds itself stuck between the so-called East and the so-called West, or so-called Christianity and so-called Islam, or so-called this and so-called that, this is the situation that Sudan finds itself in while fighting amongst themselves. So let me get back to this article that I was reading previously, because I think we have some more left. And it says, when CNN asked the RSF spokesperson, stop jumping around on me here, hold on, about their objective, he said the group was seeking to capture al-Burhan and bring him to justice for many treasonous acts against the Sudanese people. Because RSF was fighting at the beginning of the war for the cause of the neoliberals, namely to rid the country of Islamists, international think tanks, the likes of International Crisis Group, have not hesitated to wish it well. So let's say this person's sincere and they wanted to rid the country of Islamists because what they were doing. They were committing some crimes against people. Let's not sugarcoat that. The reality is that by doing that, you're opening up the door for homosexuality, feminism, and pedophilia. That is all you're doing by working with the neoliberals and the NGOs. That's what you're opening up the door to. Now, they're not going to necessarily tell you that, although this article kind of made it plain. But I'm sure this dude's not thinking that, right? But that's when you fight on their side, that's what you're fighting for. So as bad as the Islamists are, and they bad, when Black people practice these things, the part, whatever the ideology is, Christianity, Islam, whatever, Judaism, whatever, the part that says, because there's always a part in there somewhere, you got to find it, that says, hey, we don't deal with sodomy and things like that. Black people take that to the fullest. The people that we get it from don't. They do the opposite many times. You see what I'm saying? But we take it to the fullest. And so, in a weird way, if they weren't doing anything else right, and they almost weren't doing anything else right, Omar al-Bashir was helping protect the country from homosexuality, pedophilia, and feminism. It's just these are the type of weird times we're in where people we don't like can be accidentally doing something that we do like, right? Now it says, in a report released July 2023, the ICG stated that the RSF has held the upper hand in Khartoum since the early days of the war, but that advantage is only growing more apparent. Even some army backers suggest the RSF is on the cusp of decisive military victory in the capital. Well, we're in 2024, and apparently they weren't on the cusp of it that much. Says even military victory in the capital, especially if it can soon overrun the compound where Army leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and some of his key lieutenants are sheltering. The RSF has besieged the headquarters almost since the conflict began. It has now begun tightening its grip. Calling the SAF's claim to the title of National Army dubious. The report went on to assert, given internal fissures and the deep hostility towards the RSF, any settlement raises the risk of a split in the army, including the possibility that hardliners team up with Bashir-era Islamists to fight on. Okay. So what they're saying is, okay, this is interesting. So what they're saying is that even if this guy wants to make concessions, the Arabized Muslims and the hardcore people that's fighting will reinforce the SAF and still fight on. So if that's the case, then how can you say that you on the verge of victory when they can bring another faction in as ally and help you defeat that enemy? So this sounds like one of them things where you just hoping. You know, sometimes you got to read between the lines in these articles. So anyway, the sidelining of Islamists in Sudan is clearly a top item on foreign agendas for Sudan. Apart from failing to see military progress by the SAF, made by the SAF, courtesy of its air superiority, the ICG also did not register the change in RSF goals for the war. While the RSF needed the neoliberals for the purpose of winning international legitimacy, the talk of restoring civilian rule figured prominently in the rhetoric. But as the war scales tipped in favor of the SAF, RSF was more in need of a source of fighters to join the war. The neoliberals were of little help in this regard. As a result, the RSF spokesperson started to claim that their goal is to end the 1956 state controlled by riverine communities of central and northern Sudan and to replace it with one controlled by Junaid tribes, the ethnic group of Arab origin that live in the Kordofan and Darfur regions of Sudan, as well as Chad and Niger. So they're moving the goalposts. The involvement of fighters from these tribes, be they Sudanese or non-Sudanese, is now a prominent feature of this war. Of course, this has momentous implications for territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Sudan and for the peace and security of the region. So basically, they're trying to bring in non-Sudanese to reinforce their forces, which can destabilize the entire country and the entire region, which they're doing in the name of the neoliberals, which means that some type of way, somewhere, there's some resources under the ground, the feet of these people, that these people are trying to get to, and destabilizing this region is the best way to do it. I'm so glad I did this. There's so much more to this and so much hidden in plain sight to this situation. Now, apparently I've been made a liar because I done went past my first hour with this. But this is so interesting, and there's so much more going on. So let me try to get through this article. It's Rosalind Marsden, the former UK ambassador to Sudan and associate fellow at Chatham House, has warned there's a risk of a de facto partition in which Hemedti controls Darfur and much of Khartoum, SAF controls much of the rest of the country, especially east and south, and an armed movement led by Abdel Aziz al-Hilu contests South Kordofan and the southern Blue Nile. Indeed, in an audio recording released on September 14th, Hemedti suggests for the first time that if Burhan establishes a government in Port Sudan, he will form a government in Khartoum. Here is what's interesting with that. This almost mirrors this breakup of the country and people establishing their governments in different places. Weirdly enough, ironically enough, this almost mirrors what happened in the Congo during the time of Lumumba, where you had outside forces propping people up for them to, have their own independent governments, independent of Lumumba. So again, as students of history, this stuff starts to look real familiar, and we've gone from not really knowing what's going on to seeing what's going on and saying, oh man, we've seen this one before. It says, yet this dimension is not taken seriously enough by the international community. For the United States, for instance, the most urgent concerns in Sudan shifted from the exclusion of Islamists to addressing humanitarian needs. Sure, not putting the country's transition back on track. Have y'all heard Mr. Biden or the Secretary of State or anyone of that stature say anything about the humanitarian needs of the Sudanese people in year 2024? If you have, you can put the link, or you can just say, yeah, I heard them, or whatever. I haven't heard anything, but I don't see it. I'm not all I seeing, so I'm just saying. It says that being Sudan's largest contributor of humanitarian aid, the U.S. has expressed its support for a ceasefire and peace negotiations to make delivering aid possible. Indeed, providing humanitarian assistance to displaced Sudanese people should be the top priority, particularly in the Chadian border town of Adre, where many have fled from neighboring Darfur, the same Darfur where the massacre occurred over 20 years ago. Nonetheless, if the transition is not fixed, the humanitarian crisis will persist for years to come. Obviously, last week it was announced that SAF and RSF have resumed talks at Jeddah with the hope of agreeing on a ceasefire and possibly a deal to end the war, with SAF gaining the upper hand on the main battlefield and RSF losing military momentum. It is expected that the latter will sue for peace. This is particularly so because the meandering lines of tribal fighters from Western Sudan to Khartoum has started to dwindle. About 2 weeks ago, mediators from the African Union and the Sub-Regional Intergovernmental Authority for Development visited Cairo to consult with politicians on how to start an all-inclusive process to restore the Sudan transition to its path. Perhaps there's a ray of hope after all. Or, yeah, hopefully there's hope. Sudanese people are hardwired for freedom. Call for elections will resonate with many. Sudan is not new to multi-party elections, which were held even during al-Bashir's regime. In 2010, the polls that were convened at the end of the transition period following the second Sudanese civil war were monitored by the Carter Center and were seen as highly credible. For what that's worth. It is not true that the Sudan war is a fight between two generals, nor is it a war that was decades in the making. ICG report would have us believe. To be sure, this is a war that was triggered by a derailed political transition. This is a person's opinion. The parties who caused this to happen still do not see the need for a country to pivot to the path of its transition. For them, a return to the transition implies the vanquishment of RSF and even worse, the return of Islamists. If that is the likely outcome for some, it is better than for the country to disintegrate. Yet many active players are now convinced that there's no viable alternative for this country other than to restore the transition to its path. So he's saying that if they don't get back to the transition and trying to stabilize the government, stabilize the economy, the whole country could collapse. All right, so let's do this next article real quick, and then this is the last one, and then we'll get into the Congo. So this is Sudan's communication shutdown must be reversed urgently. This is from February 13th. It says, we, the undersigned organization and members of Keep It On Coalition, a global network of over 300 human rights organizations from 105 countries working to end internet shutdowns, urge the warring parties in Sudan to immediately end the disruption of internet access across the country. Internet shutdowns during wars and armed conflicts endanger people's lives, prevent access to life-saving information, and exacerbate humanitarian crises. Amid the ongoing brutal violence in Sudan, the continued weaponization of internet shutdowns is a flagrant violation of international law. Since the conflict broke out April 2023, both the RSF and the SAF have deployed internet shutdowns as a weapon to block informational flows in areas controlled by the opposing faction. This is exacerbating an already dire humanitarian crisis that has seen at least 13,000 people killed and over 9 million internally displaced, the largest internal displacement crisis in the world, even worse than Congo, which is saying something. The ongoing internet blackout has posed serious challenges for emergency assistance and humanitarian aid. A number of Sudanese embassies and consulates have suspended their consular services for Sudanese communities as a result of the shutdown. Accessing life-saving information on safe routes, as well as wiring money or using e-wallets, which many in Sudan depend on, has become more challenging, being cut off from family members and loved ones and unable to check on their well-being or whereabouts. It's also exacerbating people's suffering. The ongoing internet shutdown began on February 2nd, following reports that the RSF had seized control of internet service provider data centers in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum, causing internet outages in several parts of the country. The outage was confirmed by Cloudflare radar, also showing significant disruption to internet connectivity since 4:15 local time on February 2nd, including complete outages of NTN Sudan and Sudatel Group Services Internet Outage Detection Analysis. The blackout persisted after the RSF shut down MTN and Sudanese switchboards in Khartoum, sabotaged Zain equipment, and threatened to destroy additional communications infrastructure should companies fail to comply with their shutdown orders. This came in retaliation to reports of the SAF shutting down internet service in Darfur for several weeks. So that's an aspect of 21st century warfare that we don't talk about, attacking communications and internet infrastructure. And the thing about it is that when things like that happen, that allows people to commit atrocities without being seen, so that when the time comes and you try to restore some type of order, you know who was doing what, so you can send them to whether it's an international tribunal or the people in the street take care of it. And they outlined a lot of the reasons why that is extremely dangerous and distressing. So I had one more video that gives a pretty good explanation of this whole Sudanese situation. So I'm going to put that up, and then we will get back to, we'll move on to Congo.
Do you feel like the story of Sudan has been forgotten?
The story of Sudan, looking back from the end of 2023, is one that I find really dispiriting, actually. The Khartoum that I left, that I last saw in 2020, will never exist again. Not only are we dealing as Sudanese people with the weight of the country collapsing, but it's also having to deal with it in relative silence, in an international media context where there are other wars that people are paying more attention to. And it feels like the Sudanese people are mourning and grieving alone.
7 million people have been displaced. Over 1 million people are now refugees in neighboring countries. The amount of death that has been recorded, according to UN numbers, at least 10,000, probably higher. So I think we do have one of the largest catastrophes of last year still unfolding and still ongoing.
This time 5 years ago, we were witnessing the beginning of protests that would hail the end of the Bashir regime.
Reports say that Sudan's military has forced President Omar al-Bashir to step down, ending 30 years of rule.
And there was this real period of excitement. It felt like Finally, we were going to be known for something apart from a genocide in Darfur, apart from the longest civil war on the African continent.
Sudan's December revolution really caught the world's attention as one of the most outstanding, largely nonviolent movement in recent decades. It provided images that I thought were very unforgettable. Many in the world will remember the image of Ala Salah, the young Sudanese woman who mounted a car, raised her hand, dressed in a traditional Sudanese tobe. The one image that for me, that remained in my mind of that era really was April 6th, a few days before the removal of al-Bashir, was to see the amount of protesters in front of the army headquarters. I thought that was a game changer. To me, that signaled that the end of the government was near.
وعليه أعلن أنا وزير الدفاع رئيس اللجنة الأمنية العليا باقتلاع ذلك النظام والتحفظ على رأسه بعد اعتقاله في مكان آمن.
During this transitional period after the revolution of 2019, I think you could look at it and see this kind of Game of Thrones-like situation between two components of the military establishment.
They then, turned against each other. And that's what we saw in April 2023.
Fighter jets circling overhead, firing missiles. Gunfire interrupting a live television broadcast.
The two main belligerents, as we like to call them, are Hemeti, who's the head of the Rapid Support Forces, and Burhan, who's the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces. Both Hemeti and Burhan worked together in 2021 to overthrow the Transitional Council and declare that they were protecting the revolution. Of course they were not. It was about returning Sudan to a military, autocratic regime. Once the two generals overthrew the civilian-led government, then it became, well, who's going to be the top dog? The Rapid Support Forces, that are this irregular paramilitary militia, essentially, that came out of the Janjaweeds, which roughly translates to devils on horseback, were responsible for the genocide in Darfur that happened 20 years ago. In some ways, the easy story is to say that it is a tale of two generals or a tale of two belligerents. I myself use that framing sometimes because it felt like a way to quickly talk about what was going on. But of course, that's only the superficial story. The real story is about a challenge that Sudan has faced over the decades since independence, and that is, how do you govern a country like Sudan without being a general?
I just wanted to play that so we could hear from people on the ground and how they see it. And we see that even for some people there, it's a complex situation. And I would argue, based upon what we have read and what we have studied, that they don't have a full grasp of the ramifications of what is taking place based upon who these two groups are aligned with. Now, when you fighting for your life and you trying to survive, finding the intricacies of the situation a lot of times is not your highest priority. Survival is your highest priority. So I am not surprised that they didn't get deep into that. So what I'm gonna do before we get into the the Congo conflict, and I'm trying to move a little bit faster with that, is to let you all know that, as I said before, now I have a way to distribute the edited lectures that I've done over the last 4 plus years or so. And what I'm going to do is this. Anyone who donates between $20 and $50, I will, well, I'll say 25 and 50. I will send you the 2022 Dr. Khaled lecture and the 2019 Dr. Khaled lecture, which sound like the same lecture, but as someone who's edited them, they are not the same lecture. They are very much different. Anyone who donates more than 50 in a month will get those within 1 month time frame. We'll get those two plus the Francis Cresswell Wilson lecture that was edited by my producer Cindy. So you'll get those three, and you'll get anybody that donates over 50 in a month will get those three, plus you will get the edited Chancellor Williams gravesite celebrations that feature myself and well, most of them feature myself and Brother Genie. One of them just features me. So you'll get the ones where it's cold as I don't know what out there, and we wearing 3 coats, and you get the ones where we are it's relatively warm. Of course, it's always December, so it's never warm. So that is what we're going to do so that your donations will be of value. The only thing I will need is anyone that does that, I will need your email address so I can send that to you. So I fought with the service that I had, like literally, to get them to fix the situation where I wasn't able to share video files and stuff. Now I am able to share video files. Shout out to Sister Spirit, Mind, Character, Soul, who has paid for the StreamYard for this month already, as well as helping to pay for our music that isn't on at the moment. So I just wanted to let you all know that. So anybody that's interested, and if you just rather bypass all that and just pay the $20 outright for either one of those lectures, just shoot me an email at, as the email goes by, DC Radical _1 at, and I'll just tell me which one you want, and I will send it to you. So with that, let's get on to our next discussion quickly. All right. A guide to the decades-long conflict in DR Congo. And this is also from Al Jazeera. It says the resource-rich country now facing a major rebel attack has been racked by conflict. It says for more than 30 years. I think we could say that it's been racked by conflict since independence and since the murder of Lumumba, which would be, well, I guess considering the time of, time of Mobutu, it's not been a time of conflict, but it's even worse than conflict when you're ruled by. Anyway, so let me get into it. Just thinking about Mobutu makes my head hurt and make me start want to cuss him. Every time I think about the murder of Patrice Lumumba, man, it breaks my heart. You know, one of the most interesting things that ever happened was that Malcolm X said that the murder of Patrice Lumumba was the most important political assassination of the 20th century. Ironically, a few years later, I could argue that the murder of Malcolm X was the second or third most important political assassination of the 20th century. may be behind Kennedy now that I know what the Kennedy situation was about. And that is another discussion. Let us read. It says escalating tensions in the Democratic Republic of Congo have once again drawn global attention to the security crisis in the African country's mineral-rich eastern region. Heavy fighting between the Congolese armed forces, the FARDC, and the M23 rebel group in the country's troubled North Kivu province has forced thousands of civilians to flee their homes in the past 2 weeks, taking what little they can. Dozens have been killed and hundreds of thousands displaced since January. There are fears that the regional capital, Goma, home to some 2 million people, and about 500,000 displaced people seeking refuge there, could soon fall to the advancing M23, a potentially devastating blow to the Congolese government's control of the region. The UN Security Council voiced concerns at the escalating violence after M23 shelled Goma Airport, damaging Congolese military aircraft. Racked by conflict for more than 30 years, the DRC's insecurity is caused by complex and deep-seated factors, as well as a multitude of actors. Apart from the M23, numerous other armed groups, Congolese and foreign forces, are battling for control, mostly in the eastern part of the country. Some of Kinshasa's neighbors are also implicated in the crisis. Approximately 6 million people have been killed since 1996. More than 6 million people remain internally displaced in eastern DRC. 6 million Black people killed. All right, and here they have a timeline. It starts with the Rwandan genocide, 1994. DRC conflict begins as a major spillover of ethnic wars in neighboring Rwanda. Millions of people flee into the DRC, including armed fighters. Says the CNDC, later the M23, the ADF, and Codeco rebel groups emerge as neighboring countries' armed and counter-armed fighters. They are active in ongoing conflicts in Ituri and North Kivu provinces. Says the UN deploys UNESCO peace forces in 1999. The unit is now phasing out. Actually, hold up, I missed something here. Says Uganda, Rwanda, Angola invade the DRC to target Hutu fighters from Rwanda, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Eritrea, and Sudan later get pulled into the war. Now, this just reading this is a mess. 2012, the M23 seizes Goma. Special UN force intervenes and succeeds and pushes back the rebels. 2022, a dormant M23 resurfaces, seizes territory in North Kivu, and starts to press on Goma, a city of 2 million people. 2023, EAC's November 22 deployment of troops fails to stop M23's advance. EAC and UN troops start withdrawals after violent protests. Regional Sami DRC troops are deployed in December 20. Currently 2024, M23 rebels close in on Goma. Now, let's go back to Rwanda genocide. The DRC crisis originally began as a result of a series of post-colonial battles for power after independence from Belgium in 1960, which culminated in the assassination of popular leader Patrice Lumumba and the 3-decade military rule under Mobutu Sese Seko. Ethnic tensions in Rwanda forced more than 300,000 people from the Tutsi minority group to flee to neighboring countries in the 1960s, particularly to the DRC. Now, I didn't know that was going on in the 60s. Some of these refugees regrouped and sought power in Rwanda after the country gained independence from Belgium in 1962. So, all right, let's stop right there. So, if there was a conflict there in the 60s, then the Belgians started the conflict. There's no way around it. And when you're talking about Belgians, you're talking about small hats. So again, we're looking around trying to figure out what's going on and who's behind it. And as I said before, if you look in the corner, you're going to see a hat scurrying in the corner, right? Now, in the early 90s, the DRC saw a spillover of civil war and subsequent genocide in neighboring Rwanda. In October 1990, a civil war broke out after the Rwandan Patriotic Front, a Tutsi rebel group led by current Rwandan President Paul Kagame. Wait a minute. Really? Paul Kagame invaded the country from his Ugandan base. In April 1994, extremist Hutu militias attacked the Tutsis and moderate Hutus, killing 800,000 to 1 million people over 100 days in what is known as the Rwandan genocide. Hutus form 80% of Rwanda's population. Kagame's RPF seized the capital Kigali on July 4th as Hutu genociders, troops, and former regime leaders fled to the DRC. An estimated 2 million Hutu civilians fearing revenge and reprisals also poured into the country. Says what led to the first Congo War of 1996-97. Tensions rose between local Congolese tribes, Rwandan immigrants from the colonial and pre-1960 independence periods, and those who fled the 1994 war. Often local tribes battled Tutsis, but conflicts also existed with Hutus as locals feared they would be outnumbered. Early immigrants had rights to Congolese citizenship, but later immigrants were regarded as refugees and many were housed in camps. So let's stop right here. What did I talk about earlier? You have borders that are drawn by outsiders. You have groups of people that don't get along. Then you have conflict over resources, and you have this boiling cauldron of confusion. And then this is how you get wars and genocides for really reasons that not are going to benefit most of the people. Most of the people are going to suffer. A lot of people are going to be killed and destroyed. And we'll see who benefits as we get further into this. Now it says Hutu militias who fled Kagame's rule to regional camps in eastern DRC began to regroup and restore a Hutu government in Kigali. They launched attacks on Rwanda and also killed Tutsis inside the Congo. In response, Rwanda started to arm Tutsi militias inside the DRC. Across the DRC, many Congolese were resentful of Mobutu's corrupt rule. Rebel groups seeking to overthrow him emerged, including the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo, led by Laurent Kabila. Rwanda, which accused Mobutu of harboring Hutu perpetrators of genocide, armed the rebels and sent in Rwandan troops in 1996. On October 24, 1996, the Tutsi-dominated AFDL in Kivu, and troops of the Rwandan army launched offensives in eastern DRC, sparking the First Congo War. Uganda, Eritrea, Angola, and Burundi, all Rwandan allies, joined the war. Now, how in the world have y'all seen a map and seen how small Eritrea is? How in the world did they allow themselves to get involved in this? Anyway, that's just crazy. The AFDL seized power on May 17, 1997, ending the fighting, and Kabila declared himself president of the DRC. But the Rwandan troops allegedly massacred Hutu populations, forcibly repatriated Tutsis, and took control of lucrative diamond and coltan mines in the resource-rich eastern region bordering Rwanda. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty. What caused the 1998 to 2003 Second Congolese War? After his climb to power, Kabila fell out with Kagame and started to unceremoniously force out Rwandan and other foreign troops still in DRC. This alarmed ethnic Tutsis living in Congo and reignited tensions with local ethnic groups. In response, Rwanda backed a new rebel group, the Rally for Congolese Democracy, which launched a revolt in August 1998 and started the Second Congo War. A parallel group, the Movement for the Liberation of Congo, formed to fight alongside the RCD, seeking to overthrow Kabila. The DRC and rights groups claimed that the MLC was backed by Uganda, which had also fallen out with the Kabila regime. Jean-Pierre Bemba, the present Congolese Minister of Defense, led the armed group that has now morphed into an opposition political party. Kabila's government armed Hutu refugees in the east to fight back against Rwanda and the RCD. Government officials publicly incited Congolese people to attack Tutsis, leading to several public lynchings. The South African Development Community, SADC, of which the DRC is a member, deployed troops from Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Angola to fight the RCD and Rwandan troops. In 1999, the DRC, Uganda, and Rwanda signed a set of ceasefire agreements, including the Lusaka ceasefire agreement and the Luanda agreement, which were to see all sides stop military operations. The agreement also triggered the UN to deploy MONUSCO, United Nations Organization for Stabilization Mission, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Who comes up with all this? Troops to monitor the peace process. However, fighting persisted in many areas like the gold-rich Ituri, where ethnic tensions worsened by the war erupted into continuing conflict. Now, the nitty-gritty. How did M23 and other major rebel groups emerge? The arming and counter-arming of rebel militias by the Congolese government and foreign actors means that they are now between 120 and 140 groups operating in the DRC, mostly in the mineral-rich east and northeast areas. Several peace agreements with some of the groups over the years were meant to see operations stop and fighters to integrate with the Congolese army, but have failed to permanently end the activities. The latest was the East African Community-led Nairobi Peace Process and the Luanda Roadmap. The most active groups at the moment are the M23, CODECO, and the ADF. Operating in the North Kivu province, the group takes its name from March 23rd agreement 2009 with the DRC government under Joseph Kabila, son of Laurent Kabila, signed a ceasefire treaty with the Tutsi majority National Congress for Defense of the People, one of the numerous groups of fighters active since the Second Congolese War. In the agreement, the CNDP was meant to become a political party, and its fighters were to integrate into the Congolese army, the FARDC. Obviously, that never happened. However, on April 4th, 2012, 300 CNDC troops revolted, claiming poor treatment in the army. They formed the M23, claiming to be fighting for Tutsi rights in DRC. In late 2012, M23 launched an offensive seizing Goma and several other towns. A special UN force, along with the FARDC, pushed the rebels back into the eastern hills bordering with Rwanda in 2013. The M23 resurfaced in 2022 with violence attacks and seized four towns in North Kivu. The group briefly withdrew from occupied towns in January 2023 as part of the Nairobi peace process, but the ceasefire fell apart in October. The DRC accuses Rwanda of funding M23. A 2023 UN group of experts report also found that Kigali finances the group. Rwanda denies the allegations. Let's stop right there. BB4 Day Straight Black prior to Raw Vital ITOP. This is just a mess. And this mess started with, we got to go back even before the murder of Lumumba. This mess started. Yeah, brother, the rulers of Belgium have long been small-handed. This mess started with colonialism. This started with Y'all help me. Brother, help me out. You know what I'm talking about. The devil that murdered 16 million Congolese during his rule. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I can't even think of the devil's name. Leopold. This mess started with Leopold. And this is one of the most mineral rich places on earth. And so the reason why you have so much fighting and counterfighting is because there's, as the European would say, there's gold in them dar hills. So what I'm going to do is play, and I think I played this video in another show. I could not find the video explaining the Mobutu and Lumumba and everything like that, but this video, it gives you a brief outline of the whole Congo situation going back from, I believe, from Lumumba's time till now. So we're going to check that out, and then we'll go from there.
What do you really need to know about the Congo? It's the greatest single example in history of how predatory elites rip off millions of people and get away with it. Congo is one of the most mineral-rich countries in the world. It's got gold, diamonds, copper, uranium, cobalt, and coltan, which you use every day. It's in mobile phones, laptops, even jet engines. There's estimated to be more than $24 trillion worth of mineral wealth under Congo soil. So why are its people some of the poorest in the world? It starts with the story of a great crime. Back in 1885, a king in search of an empire created a state the size of Western Europe. King Leopold of Belgium drew borders through ancient kingdoms, forcing 450 different ethnic groups into a new state. Leopold's plunder of the natural resources caused as many as 10 million deaths. It sparked the world's first human rights campaign, which forced the king to hand over the country to the Belgian state. But Congo remained a place where the white man dominated and exploited. Enter a new hope for Africa.
Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin.
The independence leader, Patrice Lumumba, inspired millions across the continent, but the West saw Lumumba as an enemy. The Belgians supported a rebellion against the new government in the mineral-rich east of the country. And when Lumumba appealed to the Soviet Union for help, the Belgians conspired with the CIA to murder him. It paved the way for the 3 decades-long rule of President Mobutu. They didn't come any greedier in Africa. It's estimated he stole around half of the $12 billion his country received in aid. The West helped to keep him in power. A people and a country finally breaking under the strain of 26 years of autocratic and brutal dictatorship. But Mobutu's era ended in the most unexpected of ways. Genocide in Rwanda, the country next door, saw millions flee into Congo. War followed them. Rwanda and Uganda sponsored a rebellion that overthrew Mobutu and installed the Kabila family in power. In a decade of war, more than 5 million people are estimated to have died, as 9 African nations and numerous rebel groups fought each other for territory, for control of Congo's riches. Warlords dominated swathes of the country. The word used to describe you is warlord, not peacemaker, warlord. I'm not a warlord. It always comes back to the money.
We're going to make some history together today.
With the tech boom of the new millennium, Congolese coltan was in high demand.
As there is a new commodity that we all want for our mobile phones or for our electric vehicles, the reality often is that Congo has it. And so we start to see the unscrupulous businessmen and women. We start to see the corrupt leaders.
Human rights groups allege that around $750 million in mining revenues has been stolen under the rule of President Joseph Kabila and his cronies. Congo is a country where more than 70% of the population lives below the poverty line, where women suffer some of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world, and human rights can often be abused with impunity.
This soil on which we sleep is the same soil where we buried our children.
Such suffering isn't the natural condition of these people, it's man-made, and that is the tragedy of Congo. The current president, Joseph Kabila, has stayed in power beyond the 2 terms allowed to him under the constitution. But something new and big has been happening in Congo.
They're protesting, they're organizing, they're using social media in a way we've never seen before.
Are you afraid of the state?
No, jamais.
The nation now waits to see if President Kabila will try to cling to power or hold free elections. The fate of 78 million people hangs in the balance. Congo's history, though, makes it hard to feel optimistic. If only Congo's vast natural resources could be used for the benefit of all its people.
You mean to tell me that I've been muted all this time? Oh man. How long have I been muted? Because I've been reading this article all this time and no one has heard me. Oh my goodness. Ah. Are y'all serious? Y'all. If I was muted, y'all should have called me. Whoever got my number should have called me and be like, "You're muted." All right, man. I can't even believe this. So y'all saw me clicking through the articles. Y'all knew I was reading. Well, first of all, I thank everybody who's still here, who's still paying attention through 5 minutes of ridiculous silence. So I've been muted since I've read a whole article with nobody listening whatsoever. Oh my goodness. All right. Anyway. So, all right, well, cool. Let's just do this. Let's just bypass the whole M23 thing and get to the root of it. Since I just spent 5 minutes talking to myself for no reason whatsoever, I can't even do nothing but laugh at myself, man. Oh my God. So here's the deal. The Europeans said it comes back to the money, right? So let's get to the root of the money. Because we talked about the M23, we talked about their background, we talked about how they came about. We talked about all that. So all that's clear. So I don't have to just go back through that. So what we're going to do, we're going to read this last article because obviously I'm tired and need to get off the mic. And we're going to deal with this. NGOs urge continued sanctions against DRC mining giant Dan Gertler. You like, who the heck is Dan Gertler and what does he have to do with anything? Dan Gertler is an Israeli billionaire who acquired mining and oil licenses at knockdown prices from the Democratic Republic of Congo government or state-owned mining companies, which he then sold to multinational corporations and sometimes even back to the Congolese government itself, making huge profits. Gertler's operations generated in only 2 years more than 1.36 billion of loss for the DRC, according to the Treasury. In 2017, the United States sanctioned Gertler for corruption, banishing him from the US dollar system. Now, hold up. Wait a minute. Do you know how corrupt you have to be for the US government to say, hold up, man? You can't even, because basically that the Treasury and the Federal Reserve are telling you that you can't be in their money system because you're too corrupt. Just think about that. Think about how corrupt you have to be for the US government to be like, nah, bro. Nah. we can't have you over here. You're too much of a scammer. Your scamming is on a level that we can't even get to. $1.36 billion in 2 years. So we're gonna watch this quick video where it just breaks down who this Gertler dude is. Because when I was looking, I was trying to figure out, okay, I know it's about the money, I know about the coltan, I know about all that stuff. But somebody has to be behind it, helping to fund this stuff and making money in all the chaos. And this is the person I found. And Gertler is what? Y'all put the emoji in the hat for what Gertler is as I bring up this video. All right. Now we got to call out. Mr. Trump. We got to call him out. But what did it say? Said in the last days of the Trump administration, Gertler's funds were unfrozen under the Trump administration. And then, weirdly enough, under the Biden administration, the sanctions will reimposed. But at this point, that's largely ceremonial because the man is already absconded with at minimum $400 million and at maximum $1.2 billion. And Mr. Gertler, now we know that Mr. Biden don't really have a problem with it because Mr. Biden is a devout Zionist and Gertler is what? An Israeli businessman whose grandfather started a diamond exchange in 1947. Is that not the year that Israel was founded? So as soon as he got there, his grandfather got there and started a diamond exchange. Now, here's the question that somebody needs to ask. How do poor, oppressed people from all across the world start a diamond exchange when none of them come from a place that has diamonds? Let us take all the time we need to process that information. Then Gertler goes to the DRC, and the reason he knows that the DRC has those type of resources is because his grandfather ran a diamond exchange, becomes friends with the president, gets the rights to the mines, and economically rapes the country while war is going on over the resources that he owns. And then he sells the rights to somebody else for something that he doesn't own and makes $500 million to $1 billion. You can't make this up. And once again, here we are looking at 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 groups of black people, because all types of people involved in this, trying to figure out why they all fighting each other. And while they all fighting each other, the hat is running away again with the bag. Right? I mean, the evidence is definitive. This isn't a conspiracy theory, or this isn't making up stuff or whatever. I mean, it's right in front of our face, and almost no one is talking about it. So let's read this article so we can go ahead and close out, since obviously, I had either had too much or not enough coffee. Says earlier this year, 25 Congolese and international civil society organizations wrote a letter to the U.S. the U.S. Secretary of State, calling on United States government to maintain sanctions against diamond trader Dan Gertler. Forget maintaining sanctions. Get his money that he stole and put it back into the hands of the people. How about that? I mean, what are we talking about here? You talking about closing the barn door after all the horses done escaped. Since reaching a settlement requiring Gertler to hand over several valuable mines and oil concessions, the Democratic Republic of Congo's government, backed by some local civil society groups, says the sanctions have had the desired effect and should be lifted. Anti-corruption groups in the country say no. Well, nah, because if Kabila is still in power, and I don't even know if Kabila is still in power, that's his man. So if that's his man, why would you lift the sanctions so his man can come back and rape the country again? The concern is legitimate. On January 15, 2021, as former President Trump was leaving office, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin granted the Israeli businessman a 1-year license to do business with U.S. entities and access frozen money to U.S. accounts. Wait a minute. The Treasury said, I thought they said the president. Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, is a hat. Dershowitz is a hat. They out here looking out for their hat buddy while Trump is trying to figure out how he lost the election. Man, knowing Trump, wasn't even paying attention to what was going on. They probably told him some whatever, and he like, oh yeah, okay, you can sign off on that. Bruh. Hey, man, we still got to put Trump on the carpet for this because it happened on his watch. But I guarantee you, he ain't know what the heck was going on and didn't know who this dude was because he had a week left in office. Man, this is the problem. Who cares or what does it matter who you vote for if the hat is either funding or surrounding the president, and we already know that they control the Congress because at least I thought I played Dr. Cynthia McKinney talking about that. And if I haven't played it, then I have to do a radical report so y'all can see it and everybody can remember it because she said it years ago, right? Now, the 1-year delay was meant to allow the U.S. administration to examine evidence provided by Gertler before deciding on the final lifting of the restriction. First of all, what you need evidence from him for? The man is a crook and a thief. What you need evidence from a thief to say I'm not stealing anymore? This whole process is ridiculous. A few months later, the Biden administration canceled the license, arguing that the measure is inconsistent with America's strong foreign policy interests in combating corruption around the world. Man, you can't even combat corruption in America. What are we talking about here? Specifically including U.S. efforts to counter corruption and promote stability in the DRC. Okay. Sure. Whatever. But there's nothing to say that it can't happen again. When contacted, the U.S. State Department and U.S. Treasury Office did not respond to our request for an interview. I wonder why. Starting in 1997, Gertler acquired mining and oil licenses at knockdown prices from the Congolese government or state-owned mining corporations, which he then sold to multinational companies and sometimes even back to the Congolese government itself. In 2021, making huge profits. As we know, 2021, Congo is not for sale. A coalition of 16 anti-corruption organizations calculated that Gertler's Ventura Group would earn massive royalties from just 3 of the mining projects he gained an interest in: Komodo Copper Company, KCC, Mutanda, and Metalcoal. We estimate that Gertler will receive at least $1.76 billion in royalties between 2021 and 2039. That's an average of $254,000 per day over the next 19 years. Man, if y'all don't send somebody to go up there and grab that dude and drag him back and do what needs to be done, are you serious right now? How in the heck do you, as a leader of a nation, allow somebody who has no connection with your country to walk away with $250,000 a day for the next 2 decades? This is insanity. This is the most, man, this is the most ridiculous. This is one of the greatest ripoffs, the greatest flim-flams, the greatest crimes in human history as far as just outright stealing. We can't even sit around and even conceive of this type of crime. Like the stuff that we get arrested for, we're not even thinking big enough. This is crazy. I mean, I don't have a dog in the fight, but if the rebels are gonna say, hey, small hats can't come and steal all the money, then we got to root for the rebels. I haven't heard if y'all heard anybody else talk about this, y'all let me know. I haven't heard nobody talk about this. The amount of money that this small hat is stealing from the heart of Black Africa is, it's mind-boggling to me right now. Brother Dessalines, that's what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. I agree with you. While all these black people are fighting each other, killing each other, blowing each other up, committing all types of atrocities and insanity. And it's a hat walking away with the money, and nobody said, "Hey, hold up, bro. While we're fighting, who got the money?" And you say, "Oh, y'all got the money." Nah, we ain't got no money. We get our money from that. So this is crazy. So this dude is stealing the money, and then he offers $20 million to Kabila so he can buy more weapons, so he can continue the war and stay in power, so that the hat Gertler can steal more money. Man, I'm just glad I did this show, because I'm receiving an education as you all are receiving an education. All right, now, but in May 2022, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi wrote to his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden asking for the sanctions to be withdrawn. This letter is intended to be a plea for the removal of Mr. Dan Gertler and his group from the Global Magnitsky Act. Indeed, since the objectives of sanctions enshrined in the Global Magnitsky Act have been achieved, in that it has forced Mr. Gertler and his group to comply with good practices in the mining and hydrocarbons sector of the Democratic Republic of Congo, we believe that they no longer need to be imposed, lest they have a negative effect on the economic interests of our country. He is the negative impact of the economic interest of your country. His existence is a negative impact. The fact that you haven't brought him back for trial and find a way to get the monies back that he stole, that he probably has in some secret Swiss accounts, is the reason, bruh. Negroes who can be bought is one thing. It's one thing when you poor and you can be bought. But when you're sitting on $24 trillion of wealth and you can be bought, that don't even make sense. Because that means you're stupid and corrupt. This is just boggling my mind. All right. Since then, several Congolese NGOs came out and supported the government's call for lifting sanctions. Wait a minute. Congolese NGOs, most NGOs around the world are funded by hats. So in essence, hats have come out and supported removing sanctions against the hat. The restitution of assets can only be done if the sanctions against Gertler are lifted. This part of conditions contained in the agreement signed by the Congolese state. False. False. That's false. The restitution of assets can be attained by sending your secret service or whatever intelligence service you have after Mr. Gertler, and you take him to an undisclosed location, and then you show him pictures of his family in a situation that he wouldn't like his family to be in, and then you say, "Can you please give us the numbers and the pins to the account where you took our stolen money so that you can return it to the people? Thank you kindly, sir." Right? That's how that look. That's how other countries handle it. Okay. Let's just be realistic here. If you're going to be modern and you're going to be in the 21st century and you're going to handle things like quote unquote advanced countries do, that's how you handle these situations. You don't sit around and, man, what are these people doing? Like, this is some real Negro stuff here. The man stole the money. He's in Israel. At that point, you ask Israel kindly, "Hey, can you return Mr. Gertler?" And if they say no, then Israel is thus now an enemy of all of Africa. This is how this is supposed to work. I don't understand what's going on here. The more I read, the angrier I get. So underneath all this is a bunch of hats economically robbing the people while black people fight and kill one another. You can't make this up. Brother Destiny said, can we open up channels of communication to these brothers in DRC to inform them, because there's no way they know about this? I don't. There's a way. Brother, I put it like this, brother, there has to be a way. There has to be a way. But our thinking is so small. I'm gonna just say this, man. And everybody here knows this. I was editing a lecture and this came up. And the Neely Fuller quote about understanding racism and white supremacy, that came up. And then the next thing is Push the Black Unifier said, if you don't understand small hats, who they are, how they work, everything that you think you understand about racism and white supremacy will only confuse you even more. This is a perfect example of that. This is a perfect example of that. Not understanding hats has these people tied into knots and confused and fighting and killing one another. I mean, this is literally what the Supreme Wisdom Lessons talk about. Telling lies, causing them to fight and kill one another. The only difference is it just left out the part of stealing money while they fighting and killing one another. So I may do some more research on this Gertler dude. I'm thinking about, and I don't know what I'm gonna call it, but I'm thinking about doing an enemies list where I profile people the way I profiled the hat that's funding Malema. I probably might do one. I'm gonna eventually do one on Gertler when I get some more information. I'm gonna do one on Edward Bloom. Those of you who aren't familiar with Edward Bloom, every time you see these cases go up to the Supreme Court where they are attacking affirmative action, that's Edward Bloom. People know his name now, and people mention his name. You know what they don't mention? Y'all put an emoji of who is Edward Bloom. What's his? Just use emojis now of who he is. You ain't got to say it. We just using emojis. You can use your hat emojis. That's who Edward Bloom is. So again, as I said before, whenever we're looking around, we're trying to figure out what's going on and what some confusion is and what's happening. I mean, all you gotta do is flip over a table and look in the corner, and there's a hat scurrying away, usually with a bag. Gold, diamonds, and whatnot. So, brothers and sisters, I thank you all for hanging in there with me, considering our minor technical issue on my part. I think this has been very educational. I learned something in this process. I hope that you all learned something in this process. Remember, we're coming back tomorrow and we're going to deal with an internal issue that we have. We're dealing with I think I'm going to change the title of the show and call it the Pedo Files. We're going to talk about Nature Boy, Greek Bambaataa, Robert Kelly, Eddie Long, Malachi Z. York, and I think that's it. Maybe somebody else that I missed. So we're going to come back tomorrow at same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of The Center. Again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Basically, and then I do have, I think the final 2 episodes of the Radical Thoughts that have been done. I think they're going to go up this week. And so after I get up my four posts for the month, then I might pass around the collection plate. But I'm not going to pass it around until then. So with that, brothers and sisters, I thank you all for listening. I thank you all for subscribing. Thank you all for your support. I thank you all for hanging in there for 5 minutes of me talking to myself. I'm gonna see how I can get that edited out without taking it down, but maybe I will have to take it down. I'll figure that out and I'll let you all know how that works. So I will see you all in about 21 and a half hours or so. With that, brothers and sisters, I am going to say a BB for Odie and straight black pride. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also follow us on our other social media platforms. On Instagram, we're at dc.radical1. On Twitter, we're at dc_radical_ONE. And the Cash App is $DCRadical1. Again, thank you for subscribing. A big for Odie and straight black pride.